right, so a couple minutes after, we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks all for joining me. I'm grateful that this is at 1 o'clock because my neighbor next door decided to blow out her sprinklers and get her yard aerated at 12:15. So I was a little nervous it was going to be ridiculously loud. So they finished up, so that's awesome. So today's session is going to be centered around our EDI order processing. And we'll spend a lot more time talking about the exception management that goes into that. So essentially a lot of what Amy and I do on a daily basis, just to help everybody better understand kind of what goes on behind the scenes, and that it's not just a magic portal that your orders show up and then you get to do your job. So with that, I also want to say this is very technical. So I'll be throwing some terms out and some acronyms and such. So if something doesn't make sense or I don't do a solid enough job of explaining it, please stop me and ask. I'll tell you the first time that Amy and I were exposed to just the EDI process and order management and everything that goes into it, I was swimming. I probably was looking at Devin with, just gigantic eyes. Nothing made sense. So don't feel bad if it's a little over your head or you just need some more clarification, because that's a daily occurrence for me on this sometimes as well. So please stop me and ask those questions. So the first things we're going to do, just to highlight our agenda, is to go through just the different order types again. We'll dive into what open text is, what IDOCs are, some of the tables and pieces of information that need to be pulled together for everything to be successful, and then kind of Amy and I's role in everything that we do with exception management, and then what that all translates to that you see at the end of the process. So go ahead and kick this off. So we have our 3 order types that we deal with through the CSG refresh. We took a deep dive into our manual orders. Last month we did our PDS on the on-prompt orders. And then the last order type that we have are going to be our EDI orders. What these are, EDI stands for Electronic Data Interchange. It's essentially a transmission of the customer's order information into SAP, and there's a lot of pieces that go together that then create the order. So there's a whole lot of setup that goes into it initially, but once that setup is done, in a perfect world, these are no-touch orders. They flow into SAP without issues, assuming customers are ordering right, there's no, order management opportunities. The order just flows straight through with minimal interaction from anybody. That's the idea behind EDI. Sometimes that doesn't always work out the way that we hoped, and there's some interactions that we have to do or some additional setup that needs to take place. There we go. So this is the standard flow for an order, an EDI order. So what happens initially is the customer is going to submit an order via EDI. Most companies have a third party that they utilize that will take the information, it organizes it into kind of a raw text file. We'll get a look at that here in a couple slides. And then it sends that over into our third party system, which is OpenText. OpenText then maps everything that the customer sent to us, and then it creates a text file it's taking it from their language and putting it into our language. Once that text file is created, then SAP creates an IDOC. And we'll go into a little more detail what the IDOC represents. And then once the IDOC is created, there's a batch job that is continually running that's going to process those IDOCs and create the SOs. This is the part where Amy and I step in, or the BPAs, and this is where all of the exception management takes place. So when things aren't set up exactly as they should, the IDOC fails, and then we have to repair it. So once the SO is created, then it moves on to the CLS for their exception management, fixing weights, adjusting the orders, getting everything that needs to be done so that order can then ship to the customer. Once the CLS has taken care of all those issues, it's going to move into all of our EDI outputs. So we have a large number of EDI outputs from, orders being sent to TMC, to BlueJay, the PO acknowledgments that are sent to the customer, ASNs, invoicing. There's a multitude of different pieces that are being sent out of our out of SAP to other systems, and those are all handled via EDI. We won't touch a whole lot on that. I just want to make sure everybody understands that it's not just a very limited scope that EDI deals with. It's just about everything that we transmit out of our system. And then once it transmits out of our system, OpenText then sends it to the customer, and then they break it down similar to how we break it down to get into our system. So that's just the basic flow of a standard order. Does anybody have any questions so far? Fantastic. So the first piece that we talked about is the order coming in and being used by a third-party system that we call OpenText. So OpenText is a service provider, and it acts as the middleware between the customer and Danone. So it's basically translating all of the information from the customer system and organizing it into a fashion that makes sense to SAP and the environment that we work in. Every customer, I'd say most customers have a unique map. Some do share maps across platforms, but that mapping sequence is unique for each setup. And so that's part of the delay when we have a new customer that's requesting to go EDI, is the EDI support team has to go through and they have to make sure everything connects right, and that when that order is coming into SAP, that the right fields are going to be populated so that it can turn around and we can create a sales order. And that EDI text that we're getting from OpenText is the base foundation for everything that is loaded into the SO. OpenText also serves as a research tool. So if we ever have issues with any kind of order, we can't find it, it didn't populate the right information, we're not sure what material that we're looking for, that OpenText file we utilize to help identify some of those gaps because, like I said, it is the foundation in that raw text that we can use to better understand. Some of the pieces of information that are translated in that, in the OpenText, is going to be the customer address. That's where we're going to find the PO number. Some customers utilize a special instructions field. So Costco, for example, they have multiple different ship-tos that are all sourced out of the same facility. And so they have to put what facility that's going to go to in their special instructions. And part of the map is it's going to find that instruction and it's going to put a suffix at the end of the DUNS number, which we'll get to here in a minute. That helps us to identify which ship-to it's actually going to go to, since the address and everything is identical to, the 3 other locations that ship out of that site. Not every customer uses that, but it's definitely a key thing and an area of emphasis when we do have issues, especially with Costco. This is also where the shipping condition is housed. So if your customer is a pickup customer, if they're not putting in the right characters or the right qualifications into their text, it's going to come into SAP as a delivered load when it should be a CPU load. And that's something we have system overrides that we have in place for customers that struggle to be able to send that condition. But everything we do is we want to get them to send it as it should be so that we don't have to manually manipulate anything or utilize some of our other tables. This is where all of the product information is going to be populated. So you're going to have your UPC, your customer material number if they have one, the quantity that's being ordered, the product description. So we use that again to identify, this line item should have been this product instead of the one that it actually populated, or it should be a 6-pack instead of a 12-pack. So a lot of those kind of gray areas that we have this is a great, this gives us the answer for most of those instances. And then the key piece, I'm going to say this a lot, is a DUNS number. Most people on the call, I've said those word or that word to you, and you just probably look at me like I have no idea what he's asking for, but just do your thing. But every customer has a unique DUNS number. And what a DUNS number is, it's a data universal numbering system. So I think they have to register to receive a DUNS number. And it's a unique identifier that they use across all of their customers. So when we get that series of numbers, only ship to, Walmart 1234 has that specific DUNS. And that is provided by the customer. That's not something that we assign to the customer. We do have a table that I'll go over here in a couple slides that maps that DUNS number to the proper ship to that we have in SAP. And so that's the connection that needs to be made in order for us to be able to create the SO. Otherwise, SAP has no idea, who that customer is if we don't establish that connection. So just to look at what the open text actually looks like. So this is actually, it all runs in one line. It's not broken up like I've done here. I did that just for space and make sure it wasn't, microscopic and you couldn't read it. So at the top of the open text, this is the customer address. This is where they're sending it from. This is our SAP address. So this is the address they're sending it to. And then you continue to go down. We have our PO number, this is the DUNS number that we use to connect. We have our PO date, the date that the PO was written. The number, we can get the requested delivery date out of this. This area is for the special notes. So you can see it can be 1 line, it can be 10 lines. It just all depends on what notes that customer needs to provide. This is the shipping condition. So that H indicates to us that should be a pickup load, where if that were I'm struggling to recall what the other letters are, but there are other letters that can show up there and other formats that this can be laid out in that identify if it's a delivery versus a pickup. This right here is the pickup location. So for Dot Foods, we have this quite regularly where they'll send orders with mixed sourcing, but because it is a pickup load, we can go and reference this open text to identify, okay, this order they're intending to pick this up out of Crawford and not Sondwell. And so that's a tool that we use probably multiple times a week, I would say, to identify what that proper shipping location is. And then some of the other information is just addresses and whatnot for, I think, back-end EDIs, so the outbound stuff. And then as you get to the bottom, each line item is represented by, it starts with a G68, and then the second line is 69. That's usually where you're going to have your description and some other pieces of information in there. But this is where we can see what the actual order quantity is, what the unit of measure. We get the unit price, the UPC, and G10. If the customer sends their own customer number, Dot doesn't do that. It would also have the IN number or any other variation that you would be loading into for your EDI text lines. So this is what's driving that EDI text line as well. They're also sending the vendor number, so that's our SAP finished good number, and then we have our description here at the bottom. So all these pieces can be utilized to help us clear up some noise. For example, Dollar General, they send everything over in units, so they'll use the piece. And so this 675 is actually only 250 cases when it does the unit conversion. And so we have a table set up with material determination that helps us to convert that from piece to case. But we always validate to make sure that we're not doing doing an additional conversion for something that was sent over as case, and then it's translating it to cases, thinking it's pieces, and it's just kind of a big spider web of information that we use to create the most efficient order for you guys to work with. Any questions on the layout of the open text data? Awesome. All right, so once we run into the open text and we get all that information compiled, SAP is going to use that to create an IDOC. And an IDOC, it's the foundation that is used to create the SO. So without an IDOC, you don't have an SO. And so information that you can find and kind of how the layout is, and we'll kind of go and next slide shows you the actual pictures of an IDOC. But we can see what the partner number is. So that's going to be the distribution channel. So we're going to be able to see from the IDOC if it's an away from home or a retail customer. Sometimes those get off and there's some mapping that the EDI team needs to do so that we process the order under the correct distribution channel. In this area, we also can see who sent the IDOC. So if we ever have one that fails and it's not really clear who the customer is, we can go in and see, oh yeah, this is a Dollar General customer. They don't usually provide the customer name in the customer information field that you see down there. And so that's one we just use to validate and confirm we're connecting the correct DUNS to the correct ship to. We can also figure out what the requested delivery date is. The AG field that houses the DUNS number and the partner type. I'll explain that more in a little bit, what the partner type is and the significance there. We can pull out the PO, all of the customer address information. So this is generally what I'll use if we have a new customer and they're submitting an order. We don't have the DUNS number connected to a ship to. I'll use that address to help identify what ship to is the correct one. And then you break it, there'll be several lines depending on the size of the order that will show the all the material information. So it's going to have all of your discounts, it's going to have your UPCs, essentially all your line item text broken out. It's going to have all the unit prices, so everything that is required to correctly set up that that customer number or that order. And then in that IDOC, there's also a status record. And that status record is what we use to identify if there are opportunities or exceptions, what that exception is, and that directs our course of action to then repair it and get that order, get that SO created. So this is a picture of an IDOC. This one currently is in status 64, which is waiting to process. So there's no known issues to this IDOC. It's just waiting for the batch job to go through and pick it up. But you can see each one of these houses a different piece of information. So that AG that I referenced, that's going to be this guy right here that I'm circling with my mouse. And that's going to tell us what our DUNS number is. And it's also going to tell us our partner type. So you'll see there's a 9 that's leading this. So that tells me that that's a DUNS or a D. Anything else outside of that 9, so some will put IL, some will put UL, some use 92. There's all kinds of different variations. And that is an L partner type. And the D and the L are utilized for the back-end mapping. So that's going to dictate to SAP where to put the PO in the field or where to put the material numbers or what materials numbers to grab. And it's going to help map that out. So when we send the invoices and the ASNs and the POX, they're all going to have the correct information that that customer is expecting to receive and that their maps are connected to be able to understand and translate into their system. So as you can see, it's not fun to look at. Once you get comfortable with it, it becomes pretty easy to know where you're targeting. In the control records, like I said, you can see the address. So this log address, this is the customer's address. So we have a table that the EDI team provides us where we can put that number in and it will tell us who the corresponding customer is. So sometimes Acosta will send orders that are kind of a little funky. So we'll use this to identify that that's an Acosta customer. You can see as you go down, this is actually a Kroger order, so it's for Ralph's. But you can see what the customer name is. And as you click down in each of the segments, it's going to break down the address, dock times, just different customer pieces of information. And then within the material, you'll see we have multiple fields here in this EDP01. So the plus is going to be the unit price. And then any discounts that we have associated for that customer is going to show up here. So if we're providing them a rate per case or a percentage for their spoils, that's going to show up here, that discount. And then you have two different, I guess we'll call them UPC fields. So the 003, that's going to be the unit UPC or GTIN, depending on what the customer submits. And then the 001, that's going to be the customer number. So for Kroger, they send their own unique number that is our material number in their system. And that's how we have tables, and I'm going to go through those here momentarily, that help identify, based on the customer material information record, or the CMIR, it's going to help map that 001 number into the order. So when we get shortage notifications, we're able to send that customer material number on those notifications. So again, a lot of pieces to this, but without, if we're missing one of these pieces, that sales order cannot be created. And that's, again, where Amy and I step in to save the day. And before any of that can be set up effectively, there is some master data maintenance that needs to be taken care of, or master data setup. And that's to add our Z partners. So for each customer that is EDI, we want to ensure that we have a ZX, which is going to be the output for the invoice, the ZY, which is going to be the PO acknowledgement. So anytime you're making an adjustment to the order, whether that's shorting an item, changing quantities, anything like that, it sends that PO acknowledgement, or an 855, sends that output to the customer so that they can then turn around and update their systems. And then the last Z partner that we set up for all EDI customers is going to be the ASN output. So not every customer receives ASNs, but as a precautionary deal and to save us some work downstream, if they do ever decide to set that up, we set every customer up with all three. So ZX, ZY, and ZZ should be set up for every EDI customer. And then the last piece that we have that's only unique to customers that have a broker, so Acosta, is we have a ZC partner, and that also sends that 855 out to the broker so that, again, they can keep their systems up to date with changes that are made in the order. But the ZC is not required for any other customer that doesn't have a broker. Something I wanted to touch on too while we're here, a lot of work that Amy and I manage is going to be around ASNs. So if you're not familiar with ASNs, it's an automatic shipping notification. So what it's doing is when that order is PGI'd and it's put onto the truck and shipped out, we're sending at that same time, we're sending all of that pallet information and pallet detail to the customer. So it downloads into their system. So it speeds up the receiving process. So they're not having to go through and manually count everything that's on the order and manually entering a lot of the dates and everything that corresponds with our materials. It's already loaded into their system. The information that's being sent is laid out in a structure like you're seeing here on the bottom. This is what we call our SSCC detail. SSCC stands for Serial Shipping Container Code. Probably not, I had to look up what that actually represented, or what the SSCC meant. But what it's doing is it's taking and giving a specific identifier to every material on the order. So you can see it's giving the line number that's in the delivery, the SSCC number, that's going to be the pallet identifier. Next, it's going to give the finished good number. It's going to provide the batch date. It's going to reformat that into a batch code that a lot of customers use. So not everybody uses the decimals to separate the date. They use just one number. It's going to give the quantity. So the last 3 digits in that number just will be always 0. So we don't ship partial cases. Going to give your unit of measure. And then occasionally, if it's loaded into SAP, we'll have the production date, time, and all of that jazz that follows. This is actually very pertinent to the work I'm doing today with Amazon, where we're struggling to figure out how to effectively provide them with the correct batch date when we have multiple instances of one finished good across multiple pallets. And so there's a lot of work behind this and a lot of mapping that is required for this to be successful. So any questions on anything here? No, I've gone through a lot and I'm talking a bunch. Fantastic. All right. So the other piece, and this is some master data that Amy and I manage, is everything in SAP works off of tables. So like what we talked about before is we have the connection between the DUNS number and the SAP customer number or the ship to number. That table is called the EDPAR table. If that connection isn't made, then no order will process. It acts as a barrier so that we just don't get erroneous information that we don't know what to do with. And that's a connection that we make when the IDOC comes in for the first time. We establish that connection, and then moving forward, every order beyond that will flow through naturally because that connection is already made. I already talked about the DN and the L, so I'm not going to go in any more detail there. The other piece that we have to set up and maintain is the material determination table. So that's going to take the UPC and G10 that the customer submitted, and then it's going to make that connection to our SAP finished good number. We do set up 4 possible combinations. So that's the G10 minus the check digit, the UPC, and then the UPC minus the check digit. If this isn't effectively set up or maintained, that's when you're going to start to see your ATEX lines. On occasion, and we've been seeing this more often, as the customers aren't sending us any one of those 4 possibilities, they can't update it in the system. And so then we can set up customer-specific material determination to avoid creating any of those text lines. The next table that actually the SNAs maintain is the exclusion table. So this is for any items that are discontinued and we are no longer going to ship them in SAP. We set up this exclusion table or exclusion record so that we don't have to go through and confirm or validate that is the correct product when we know that product is not valid any longer, and we eventually delete it off of the order. And those are going to be presented as B text lines. And then the last one I've referenced already is the CMIR, the Customer Material Info Record. This is the table that's going to assign all of the MSL for your yogurt customers. If you have a customer material number that needs to be provided back to the customer, and then the rounding profile is going to be loaded here for each of the items as well. The challenge with this one is that it is loaded and maintained at the customer material level. And so every record that's in there has to be managed and maintained at literally the most minor level of detail that we can get to. So it's kind of a pain in the butt, if we're being honest. But whenever you do see an e-text line, what's happening there is we have material determination that's not set up, but we do have a customer number that's set up in the CMIR. So a little bit different than the ATEX line because you have that additional layer of the CMIR. Any questions on these tables?
Hey, Daniel.
Yep.
So the recent Costco order that came in, just so I'm understanding this correctly, is that the one that we for Georgia that we didn't have? Did that
Hmm.
lock up on the EDPAR or EDPAR?
Yep, yep. That's why that one failed, and I was able to identify quickly that there was an issue with that order. Um,
Excellent.
so, and I'll show you that that's actually kind of getting into the next couple slides. Thanks for the segue, John.
No problem.
Um,
I appreciate it.
yeah. So if everything is set up, there aren't any chat or opportunities with the iDoc. Like I said, the order is going to flow through naturally. But we know that that's not the world we live in. Things get transmitted incorrectly. Things aren't set up in the tables in time for the customer to place the order. The customer omits to provide some level of detail. All those things create iDoc failures. Um, and so this is the daily work that Amy and I are doing. We probably check these, I know for myself, 5 to 6 times a day, because we are processing hundreds of orders, even up to, I would say, probably close to 1,000 orders a day. So chances are there's going to be some challenges with those. So the main transaction that we use is the sales EDI order report, or sales order EDI report. And what this is going to do is it's going to just pull all the orders that have flown into the system, and each order is assigned a code. So all the orders that are picked up by the batch job that process without any issue, the ones that you guys see, those are all in status 53. So we want to see status 53 all the way through, because that means we don't have to take any action. And those are represented by green lights in the order. Um, when we see a status 51, that's going to be a red light for us. So that means that there's an issue with the iDoc that needs to be repaired before the order can process. The next ones you're going to see, the yellow lights, these are going to be status 64s. So the status 64 is that it's in the queue. The batch job hasn't picked it up yet. Um, Fingers crossed, everything goes well, and it moves into a status 53. Um, or if something's broken, it moves into a status 61. And then the last one that we don't really monitor or look for, we're moving things to, is a status 68, which is a canceled order. So whenever you hear us say we ZETO'd something, that means we moved it to status 68, and that'll make sense as we continue to go down this down the list. We've set up a variant for our search so that we pull out all of the 53s. And so we only are actively monitoring for status 51 and status 64. The reason that we monitor the status 64, even though the vast majority of those orders are going to transition into standard SOs, no issues, is if there's ever an issue with the batch job, we'll see those orders sitting in status 64 for, if it's more than an hour, I'm raising my hand and I'm connecting with the backline teams, because that means that the batch job's not running. It usually picks everything up within, sometimes it's a couple minutes when an order hits the door, up to about 10 to 15, depending on how many orders are waiting in the queue. And so we monitor those. So there's been a couple days, even I think mid-August, I think was our last one, where the batch job stopped running and we had to manually process all of the orders because it wasn't picking anything up. I think at one point we had like 470 orders sitting in status 64. And so that's a big piece to make sure that we're monitoring that so that we don't delay order processing and cause you guys issues downstream. And then obviously the 51s, that's really what we're looking at and taking action on. So we're keeping an eye on those, like I said, 5 to 6 times a day. Once we run the report, the EDI report, we can take any failed iDocs and move them into BD87. And that's going to be where we can go in and do our research. It allows us to open up and get into the iDoc, and actually diagnose what the problem is. And then this is also the area where if we do need to reprocess an order because we've repaired it, or in the event that we need to manually process all the 64s that are waiting, BD87 is the transaction that we use to do that. The next transaction that we use is Zito, and that's where we can actually cancel or move an order to status 68. When we move them to 68, they don't just disappear out of SAP. They're always there, um, but it moves it to a field that no table or anything is looking at or referencing to be able to say, hey, we need to process this order. So it's similar to how we reject every line item and add dupe to the PO. It's the same mindset of the system's not going to try and process that order because it's in a dead status. So anytime we have duplicate orders, which happens pretty regularly, we move them to that status 68. So nobody ever knows that they're there. But if in the event we need to go grab it, we can. In the Zito area too, if we can change this is where we can change the status. So if we have something that's 68 and we want to go through and reprocess that because we canceled it prematurely or the customer said, oh yeah, actually we want that PO, we can pull it back into status 64 and fix the errors and reprocess to get the order to process. And then the last one, this is the scariest transaction that I use in SAP, is WE19. It actually gives you a pop-up saying, are you sure you want to be here and be doing this? What this transaction does is it pulls you into the rawest form of the EDI data so that we can go and actually add lines or remove pieces of information to then go and reprocess an IDOC. So back to the Costco challenge that we had before, if the customer submits the PO incorrectly or they don't put the right notes into the note field, but it's actually supposed to go to Alaska instead of Mira Loma, we can go and manually add that suffix that normally the EDI mapping would be adding and reprocess the IDOC, as opposed to trying to get the customer to fix it on the fly and resubmit the PO and going through that whole exercise. We can utilize WE19 to be able to do that. This is kind of our last resort because it is, I mean, you can really mess up an order if you put the information, even in the wrong sequence of information, it can totally screw everything up. So unless you absolutely have to, never go into WE19. I try to avoid it at all costs. So any question on any of the transactions that we use? Awesome. All right, so this is what the transactions actually look like. So when we run the EDI report, it's going to pull this up. Like I said, we're just filtered down to the status 51 and then the status 64. And actually, John, this is the PO that you were talking about. Usually
I'm
we'll
glad I could give you an example.
It's actually kind of funny. I was putting this presentation together and I wanted to grab a snapshot of these that you're seeing here. And Monday had no failed IDOCs. Tuesday had no failed IDOCs. And then finally Wednesday afternoon, we got our first status 51. And what's rare about that is almost every day we'll have, at least a couple that trickle in. Some days are really heavy where others are, one or two here and there. But we had nothing for 2.5 days. And I was like, what the one time I actually want something to fail, nothing's failing. What's going on here? I'm going to start hoping for that more often. But what you see is you can tell when the IDOC was created. So this date could be different than what the actual PO date is, because sometimes we have instances that take several days to fix or repair. And so, that IDOC creation date could be vastly different than what the PO creation date is. This number here, the 761, these are the IDOC numbers. So similar to an SO, every IDOC has its own corresponding number. So if we ever, or when we do research, we can research that specific number. Sometimes we get additional information, sometimes we don't. It just all depends on what data is already set up in the tables. And then sometimes it's just a timing thing when it pulled in, it didn't pick up the DUNS number which is going to be that 006 number. It did pick that up for this, that second PO that you're seeing. So even though there's not an issue with that PO, we didn't pull in all the information right away. And so what that drives us to have to do is to take this IDOC number and load it into BD87, and then it's going to break out all the different issues that we have. If this were 5, it would break out all the error messages independently, so it'd group them together, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then we can go in, and if you click on the first line, if you double click on that, it'll open up all 5 errors. Or if we only have the one, or you want to trim it down, you can drop it down and open up the individual cluster of errors. So for this example, we only had the one issue, and it's that the sold to party isn't set up in the away from home bucket. So how this partner type here, this US4 DUM01, that is away from home. For retail, it's US4 dummy. So I'm not sure why they're named that way. I guess it's a French thing, but it's either a dumb order or it's a dummy order. That's kind of how we talk. But once we get in here, we can double click on this IDOC number, and it's going to open up the IDOC for us. Some of the common exceptions that we see on a regular basis is the duplicate order. I would say this is the most frequent error that we have. It can be anything from the customer sent us the PO twice, OpenText processed it twice, on prompt sent the order over multiple times. In all those instances, we go and validate, because it provides us with the SO number that it's duplicating. We'll go and check out that SO, look at the text, do the quantities line up, does everything match? If it does, then we just go ahead and zero that order. If it doesn't, that's when we'll reach out to the CLS and say, hey, what's going on? Did your customer, submit a revision? Do we need to cancel the PO that's in SAP and process the new one? We'll kind of work through that on a case-by-case basis. The next common one is that the customer's not set up. So that's just, we need to make the connection in the EDPAR table. We utilize XDO3 heavily to be able to identify that. If I can't find an address or a corresponding address to what's in the IDOC, I have to reach out to sales, and that's usually what kicks off the ORSOF process. Because a lot of customers will send orders, well ahead of when they're actually set up in our system, and so that's kind of what can cause that 2 or 3 day delay of setting up or getting that order to process. We do have instances where a customer will omit sending a UPC for an item. These personally are my least favorite because it requires the most amount of research for us. Is we have to go into the OpenText, or first we have to go through the IDOC and see what line item didn't have that 003 code, which is the UPC. Once we figure out what that item is, we have to then go to OpenText, find what the material description is, then go into MMO3 and try and find that item. Once we find it in MMO3, we then pull the UPC down. Then we go into WE19, add it to the sequence, the correct area for that information for that line, and then we have to process the new IDOC, and then go back through Zito and cancel out and move the incomplete IDOC into status 68. So this one creates a lot of headache. Fortunately, it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen for a specific customer, if they don't remedy it quickly, it can happen on every PO that they submit. So this one, we try really hard to get the customer to fall in line, because I hate doing this one. The next one that we've had is if we discontinue an item, so we move it to the exclusion list, but there still is a record for their personal customer number loaded in the CMIR, it will actually fail at IDOC versus creating that B text line. So to fix this one, we have to go into the CMIR, pull up the customer and the material, and then delete that customer number out of the CMIR, and then it processes normally and presents as a btext line. So this one's been more recent. We've discontinued some items at Walmart. And so if we don't have our timing right, where we delete the CMIRs before the next order is placed, it'll fail at IDOC and we have to repair it. The last one that we see, we've fixed a lot of these, but it still does happen, is if the customer comes over as the wrong distribution channel. So this happens a lot with Acosta, where they'll have it loaded one way in their system. They're sending it from the Acosta address, which maps to the US4 dummy, but it's actually a away from home customer, so it's a convenience customer. So we have to then go in and manually manipulate the IDOC to change that US4 dummy to US4 dummo1, and then it flows through correctly, because in the EDPAR table, the dummy and the dummo1 are two separate tables. And so it's not finding the DUNS number in the dummy area, it's going to be loaded in the dummo1 table. So we've gotten this one, when we first started managing these, was a little more difficult to identify, but we've created a tracker that calls this out pretty quickly for us. So it doesn't take a whole lot of work to work with this one. And then once we identify the root cause, or the root customer, we work with the broker, so Acosta, to get them to change it in their system, or the table that the EDI team manages will get it to point to the correct partner type. Let's use Walker or Angelica on here. So this one, Walker and Angelica had a lot of familiarity with. This is one that we actually fixed a while back, where we were getting 40 to 50 failed IDOCs a week for Myers and Wakefern. It's because the map that we had set up was pulling in the incorrect spoil, the spoil rates, and so it was actually causing the IDOC to fail, and we had to manually go through each line item and fix it in the IDOC for it to be able to process. And so when Angelica and Walker were temps, that was a lot of the work that they did to help support us, because I mean it was almost a full-time job maintaining and managing those failures. I'm glad we got that taken care of. All right, any questions on exceptions? John, did I answer your question?
You certainly did, sir. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, so once we get everything squared away, the IDOC's complete, there aren't any issues, it then creates the SO. So I created this slide to demonstrate where all the information from the IDOC is populated in the SO, and why it's important that we have everything in the correct areas. So the requested delivery date is a field in the IDOC. You can see that flows straight into the SO. We have the DUNS number. If we ever need to research, or on the back end for some of the invoicing outputs and ASNs, if we ever have any issues there, one of the places they check is to ensure that we have the correct DUNS number assigned to that customer. And so if we've connected it to the wrong person, then, or to the wrong ship to, all kinds of havoc can ensue. We ship it to the wrong facility, we don't invoice the right people, all sorts of things can happen. And so this is an area that they go in and they confirm that we have it set up to the right people. When you're looking at the product information, so these are all the different product fields that you see here. If you look to the right, this is line number 10. It's got 3 cases that are ordered. It's got the customer expected price, which is listed out there. It's determining that it's material 136504 based on the UPC that they sent, and that's being driven by the material determination, is converting that to an SAP finished good number. And then you have your line item text. So you see it's broken out into 3 different areas, but when you go into the SO, that's where you have the individual lines for each material that we have loaded. And why that's important for us to have loaded if we're sending information back to the customer where that material wasn't on the original order, is they're expecting to receive those pieces of information for their invoice and their ASNs. And if it's not there, that's when things go sideways and everything fails. And so just to hopefully bring everything full circle, the line item text isn't something that, Amy and I just want to add more work to you guys. It's just information that's being provided to us that we are expected to return back to the customer. Any questions here? Pretty straightforward. So if you ever want to go in and look at an IDOC, say you want to see what the spoils are supposed to be for a specific item, you're just a curious observer and you want to see what's going on. If you know what the IDOC number is, which chances are you don't if you're just going to do, incremental research, is you can use BD87, you drop it into the search, and it's going to pull up that individual IDOC. You want to make sure that you set your date range to when the IDOC was created and not necessarily when the PO was created, because if you don't open that up a little bit, you could potentially not find it. If the IDOC number is unknown, which is more likely the case, is in VAO2, if you click on the Service for Objects button on the top left, select Relationships, it's going to show you all of the EDI outputs that are associated with that order. So for the one I pulled here, it hadn't, none of the other, it had just created, so there weren't any outbound IDOCs that you could go in and look at. But what you do is you just double click on the IDOC button. It's going to show you what the IDOC number is there. So that's that 761 number. And then you want to make sure that you're looking at the ZUS4 orders _10. That's going to be the sales order IDOC. You'll see as you have your outbounds, you have ZUS4 delivery 11, 12, and I think 14. And those are all different outbound EDI transmissions that we're sending out to either BlueJay or the customer or, any number of other systems. A key thing to note, though, if you are doing research, IDOCs are only kept in SAP for 30 days. So if we have an issue with an order or a customer and we need to go back and look, a lot of times if it's an old order, there's a good chance that there will not be an IDOC available to go and look at the raw data. So anytime we have issues, that's why we try and stay on top of this as much as humanly possible, is the capability of research could disappear very quickly. And I think that is my last slide. Does anybody have any questions, concerns? I'll do my best to answer anything, but like I said, this is always changing and growing. And so we could run into an instance tomorrow where we've never seen that exception show up, and we have to go to work to figure out what's driving the issue. And so this will always be a challenge for us because we work with multiple different companies and different maps and all sorts of things that go into the recipe to create that SO. So any questions? Did I just confuse the heck out of everybody?
You should have made a quiz, Dan.
Should have. All right. Well, with that, hopefully you guys all wake up from your nap. I appreciate everybody taking the time to learn about this stuff. It's kind of the behind the curtain. Nobody really knows what happens. Orders just show up. So if you are curious and you want more information, please reach out. I want everybody to try and understand what we're doing here so that we can, all have a stake in the game. So please don't be shy. And thanks all for showing up.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Dan.